Hello everybody, ladies and gentlemen, I'm here again. I have just decided this time to do it with the phone. So fingers crossed, we've actually set this up in advance. We've tested it, not with the Facebook Live, but with using the video function of the phone. So so hopefully the tech issues will be sorted. It'll still be crap because we're still doing it on my phone with a blanket hanging up behind me, so it's not suddenly become some sort of high quality podcast or anything. Don't get your expectations up too much, but fingers crossed I won't spend the first entire 10 minutes sideways or fighting with
microphones.
Yes, with microphones and with all sorts of high tech rubbish. Anyway, so
I think we're good to go.
I even have a little aid memoir to stop me looking at the screen because my phone's quite distracting because my face is big right underneath and I got to look at the camera, which is where you guys are watching me. So it's more intimate, you know, feels like we're making eye contact and all that. Yes. So in order to try and help me, what Rue's done is she stuck a Barbie head on the top of my phone just above the camera. And actually,
it's half a Barbie
it's not
head.
It's not a Barbie head. That actually makes it sound less creepy. It's Barbie's face, because she's currently starting her dream business, making like handbags and accessories and necklaces and all sorts of cool things. And she's making them out of toys, which involves decapitating an awful lot of toys. So a typical work day for us at the moment looks like this. I'm sitting here in this bedroom typing away on a computer. She's sitting there in the next bedroom with a circular saw taking the faces off like about 50 Barbies that she bought in charity shops. So it's really good. Yeah. Oh, there we go. Look, she's nipped in to get. So there we have a disembodied Barbie's face in a necklace made of poured resin. It's a prototype, a work in progress. I still keep trying to convince her that there should be entrails dangling down or something just to add to the gore factor. But apparently it's meant to be pretty.
In a disturbing way.
Anyway, yes, disturbing pretty.
Yeah.
So, right. This is my readings that I'm doing for the lockdown. It's actually easing the lockdown here in WA, Western Australia. We've been really lucky because compared to the rest of the world, we've got off incredibly lightly. So we've actually not had that many cases at all. And I think in our entire state, we've had like less than 500 actual cases and still tragically 9 deaths. But I mean, compared to what the rest of the world is facing, we're doing really, really well. So we're actually opening restrictions and
Stage 1?
yes, I don't know the stages,
so many stages,
but it's all a bit complicated and it comes backwards and forwards when one politician says one thing and someone else says something else. Because again, like in America, we have a federal government and a state government, and they sort of sometimes don't agree. But as of tomorrow, the most important thing that's going to change our lives is the gyms are back open because
some gyms.
Some gyms, not all gyms.
Personal training, group
Yes,
classes.
Rue does a posh gym where she gets like, you know, one-on-one tuition practically. I think actually it's just not a very popular gym, so there's actually only 5 customers there. But anyway, she gets practically one-on-one tuition. So her gym's open, which actually means we get to leave the house because that was the only reason we left the house apart from to buy food for like months. So anyway, so that's happening. And beyond that, I think
restaurants will be opening.
Yeah, restaurants. Yeah, so back to normal life, so we can occasionally treat ourselves and go out and get a takeaway or a coffee once a week or something like that. You know, got to live, right? And other than that, it's going to be business as normal for us. Anyway, enough of that waffle. I will get to the reading. So we've got The Whole Dog, and last time I was telling you about my choice of chapters, and a few people have asked for a few things. No one person has been super excited about any one particular thing, apart from my mum, who said, please God, no renovation chapters, because she still can't actually get over the reality of the renovation. It was a very horrible and traumatic experience for her, for the rest of my family. So yeah, so she has begged me not to do renovation stories, but unfortunately nearly half the book is renovation stories. I'm going to do one, a little one at the end, which I found Really, really funny.
Oh, and she's just joined as well. Hi,
So,
Carol.
hi, Mum. Yeah, turn off when we get to the renovation bit. No, only one little renovation story. The other stories, Mum, won't worry you at all because Rue wanted me to do a sailing story, and Mum said, "Oh yes, but please God, not the one where you nearly died." And I was like, "That was the entire sailing. That was it. It was like one long near-death experience." So the sailing chapters are out. I mean, that's it. You know, don't want to scare Mum, eh? So anyway, I found some that might be a good fit. They're not at all scary, these ones. It begins with, it was set in the middle of the renovation. In case anybody doesn't know what I'm talking about, my family renovated a house in South Wales in a valley called Treorchy. The house was a shit tip. To be honest, the valley's a shit tip. I'll reserve my judgment on the rest of Wales. No, just the Valley of Treorchy is not the nicest of areas, but it's where my dad could afford to buy a house at the time that he decided to become a property entrepreneur. So he bought a house, and I convinced him, rather stupidly, to get a TV company involved, and the rest, shall we say, is history. I wanted to be famous. I still want to be famous. It's not happening. I'm on TV. Yeah, no. I was on TV. Property Ladder was an interesting experience anyway. But it's on YouTube if anyone wants to go and check it out. If you search for me on YouTube, as well as these videos, you'll find my other videos, one of which is the entire show of Property Ladder. But you're only going to get one very brief story from that today, because I don't want to drive my poor mum to despair. So instead, this is a story that happened right in the middle of the renovation. I had to stop and go into hospital for a little while. Well, you'll find out about that. So, without further ado, ladies and gents, here's today's reading. By the way, do mention Rue is just off camera there. You can't see her, but she's very pretty. And she is looking after the notes and the messages. So if you want to ask me anything, do send Rue a message or send me a message. Get so meta, confused. I've only got a small brain, and I've been drinking, obviously. So it's Sunday.
It's Monday now.
It's Monday for us. So Rue is checking messages. So if
I ever get a word in, I'll ask you your question.
Yes. If it's too quiet, or I'm doing too much of this or too much of this, tell her and she'll poke me. She's got a stick for the poking. So if it comes in the side or I'll get a dismembered Barbie limb hurled in my general direction. So yes, and feel free to ask questions, because at the end, when I've waffled and I've run out of crap to say, if you've got any questions, I can ask them. I can answer them. So that said, let us get into chapter 1. It's very I was very imaginative with my titles here. So this one's called Hospitalisation. I've always had a phobia about needles. It's a ridiculous, pointless fear, but then that's what a phobia is. Mine was so bad that when it came time to have my travel vaccinations before going to Ecuador, I point blank refused to do it. My mum, being a nurse, was disgusted with me and had decided that extreme measures were called for. So she brought the needles home and hid them in the fridge until the moment was right. I was just minding my own business in the kitchen one evening when I heard her shout, "No!" And Jill and my dad pounced on me, dragged me to the floor and pinned me in place while Mum stepped in and gave me the jab. Tricked! In my own house! Man, I was pissed off about that. But I've been through a few things since then, and it occurred to me that if I wanted to be a professional adventurer, I'm sure that profession exists somewhere, then sooner or later I would have to get over my fear. As the doctor said, why is such a strong young man afraid of such a tiny prick? The answer, of course, being that it's not the prick I'm scared of, but rather the needle that prick is holding. But anyway, it had to end. So it was that I made the journey to London and checked myself into hospital. It was to be the ultimate immersion therapy. I planned to emerge richer, hopefully unchanged by the medicines being tested, and cured of my irrational fear. I'm just going to pause there and explain. I thought I actually explained this in the chapter, but it's actually in the chapter beforehand that I was doing a medical trial. So I was testing experimental medicines for money.
Perfectly said.
So here we go, yes. I thought it was about to be covered in that little snippet, and it wasn't. Sorry. Should probably read these actually before I go on air, eh?
Perhaps.
Dead professionals. One thing I could be sure of, there will be needles enough to cure a dozen such phobias in the next 2 weeks. I was told that at least 5 times a day, even more in the beginning, nurses would be drawing my blood to see how well the drug they'd given me was metabolising in my system. It was for the same reason they also collected my wee. There was a huge fridge full of gigantic brown bottles of urine, and any time I needed the toilet, I had to find a nurse, get her to unlock the fridge, find the bottle with my unique number on it, then allow her to escort me to the nearest bathroom. She would unlock the door and thankfully remain outside it whilst I rushed in and tried to remember to unscrew the lid of the bottle before whittling into it. I'd like to say I was successful every time, but I'd be lying. Afterwards, I had to close it up and or wipe it off and hand it back to the nurse, whilst trying not to make any jokes about how she was taking the piss. It was really quite odd. The pay, though, was astronomical. Ludicrous. For 2 weeks in hospital, I was getting over £2,000. It was a staggering amount of money. The official reason for this was that we were being paid for working around the clock, back-to-back 24-hour shifts in the hospital, for which I spent the most part sleeping. There was absolutely no mention of the pay being related to the amount of danger we were in, which was comforting. When I say we, I am of course referring to my fellow medical volunteers. There were 38 of us on that study. This was the first of the downsides to chasing such a grand prize. There was one long corridor lined with 20 beds on each side, so many that they didn't even have space for the curtains around them. Now, I'm not big on demanding privacy, and those flimsy plastic curtains don't afford you much anyway, but with nearly 40 blokes in one big room, things are bound to get fragrant. Sleeping each night, if possible at all, was done to the accompaniment of synchronised farting, snoring in stereo, and the ever-present buzz of 30-plus sets of balls being scratched. It was like being in a giant college dorm room, except for one where nurses came in at 5 o'clock in the morning to jab you in the arm. Dinner times were even less pleasant. Many of the guys moaned about being hungry all day and fell upon their evening meal like starving tigers. I wasn't too bothered, to be honest, having done nothing but fart and scratch my balls all day. But that didn't matter. Everyone had to eat everything. Now, I hate vegetables. In fact, I try to avoid anything green, just in case it's been anywhere near a vegetable. Alas, whilst on a medical trial, you have to eat a balanced and carefully prescribed diet. It goes without saying there are vegetables involved, but this place went completely over the top. Meals would consist of a dry piece of grilled meat, a chicken breast, say, or a pork chop, and half a plate piled high with one kind of vegetable. Presumably this made it easier to calculate the calories and nutrients we were getting, but there are a few things more off-putting than a mountain of garden peas, at least a tin's worth, with nothing on them. And the next day the meal would be the same, only a triple-sized portion of sweet corn had been substituted for peas. I hate sweet corn. It's not food. It goes in, it rattles around inside you, and it comes out completely unchanged, which I take it to mean it's indigestible. Like swallowing the toy gun from your Action Man, you could conceivably fish it out, wash it off, and eat the damn stuff again. It can't possibly provide you with any nutrition, hence, not food. But I couldn't convince the nurses of this. I had to eat every single kernel, every pea, every piece of limp broccoli. And on the day they gave us a sachet of tomato ketchup to liven up our meal, I completely forgot about it and was sent back to eat it after presenting my plate as empty. I literally had to open the sachet, squeeze the contents into my mouth, under close scrutiny to make sure I didn't try and hide it in my pyjamas, and eat it. Ugh. On the upside, we each had our own TVs hanging from the roof on chunky metal arms. On the downside, only a handful of them worked. The rest of us fought over the single TV on wheels and the one ageing PC in the rather grandly titled computer room. Or at least we did for the first few days. Then the drugs started to kick in, and most of us never left our beds. A few people quit the trial straight away, some claiming unfinished business in the outside world that they'd forgotten about, some admitting plainly that they were scared. Didn't bother me. Sleeping 18 hours a day was something of a luxury after the last few weeks in Treorchy. We'd been working so hard on the renovation, sanding and painting late into the nights, that I felt doubly guilty about leaving Jill to it. But what else could I do? I needed the money if I was ever going to make it to Thailand and fulfil my dream of blatantly copying Toby's dream of becoming a professional diver. So I toughed it out and allowed myself to relax. I let the drugs take hold and I dreamed of a better place. It wasn't hard to imagine. Pretty much any place was better than here. few more downsides emerged as the trial progressed. Every second morning, a bunch of doctors would come around and change all our cannulas. These were tiny plastic tubes inserted into a vein in our forearms, the same things people always rip out of their arms in movies when they're determined to escape from hospital. Ours weren't linked to anything, they just ended in a little plastic tap that was taped to our wrists. Several times a day, the nurses would shake me awake, attach a small vial to the tap in my arm, open the tap, and let a measured amount of blood flow into the bottle. It was such a regular occurrence, I hardly even noticed it happening, and was usually asleep again before they closed the tap. But the tap needed replacing regularly to avoid becoming infected, and this particularly unpleasant experience could only be delivered by a doctor. My doctor one morning was an old bloke with noticeably shaking hands. I was worried when it took him 5 tries to open the packet with the new tap inside. No matter how he held it, his hands were shaking too much to get a firm grip on the packet. On the 4th attempt, he accidentally threw the thing halfway across the room. It was then I started getting really nervous. Being afraid of needles was already in my past, but being afraid of a needle in those hands, wasn't so sure. Let's just say it hurt. I mean, it really, really hurt. I could feel the guy fishing around inside my arm with the point of the needle, searching in vain for the vein he'd been targeting. Getting frustrated, he pressed in hard, causing me to cry out, "Ah! I don't think that's right!" At this, he muttered a curse and withdrew the needle. It was bent. Whatever he'd done inside my arm, he'd managed to bend the narrow steel shaft so that it stuck out at an angle. His hands shook uncontrollably as he dropped the broken needle into the sharp spin and reached for a fresh packet. "Are you okay?" I asked. I wanted to say, "Please don't touch me ever again, you fucking nutjob," but that didn't seem polite. The old man had another go. It hurt like hell, but I tried to ignore it. I'd had this done a dozen times already, and I knew that if I could shut up and let him get on with it, it would be over all the quicker. It wasn't. It took him an age, and another needle, before he finally found a vein. I was a bit pale at this point, on the verge of throwing up when at last the deed was done. Then the doctor turned around to reach for a sticking plaster, caught the tap in my arm on the pocket of his white coat and ripped it right back out of there. I shrieked. Blood spouted from my arm, one short, sharp spray which nearly reached the guy in the next bed. Then it seemed content to trickle out, running down the back of my hand and dripping off my fingertips. "Can I help?" A young South African doctor was passing the end of my bed and looked concerned when he heard me yelling, "Yes, please! Can you have a look at this? I'm not letting this pillock near me again." The old doctor stormed off in a huff as the new one slid in to replace him. At the same time, a brace of nurses arrived to see what the commotion was about. With far less fuss than I'd feared, the young doctor opened a cannula and embedded it painlessly in my other arm. It took about 3 seconds from start to finish. "That better?" he asked. "Yeah. Whew, thanks, man. That guy was scaring the shit out of me. It's never been as painful as that." "Don't worry," he said. "I'll do your cannulas from now on." It hadn't occurred to me until then, but I still had an awful lot more of these things to go in and out of me. "Thanks for that," I told him. I decided not to ask what was wrong with the old doctor. I was half afraid to find he was a patient from the other end of the hospital that had wandered in and made himself at home. Either that or a smack addict going cold turkey. "No problems, my friend," said the doctor. Then he was gone, leaving the nurses to move in clutching wads of blue tissue paper. "I'll just clean this up," one of them said, as she began dabbing ineffectually at the mess on my arm. "I think you might want to sort that out first," I said, pointing down at her feet. She followed my gaze. She was standing with both feet in a puddle of blood the size of a dinner tray. "Oh, yes." She looked a little sick herself. My heart went out to her. She was probably worried about her shoes. I'll go and get a mop." It took me quite a while to get back to sleep after that one, for some reason. By the time I'd been there a week, there was less than 10 of us guinea pigs left. It was the sleeping bit that had scared most of the others off. There was something vaguely disturbing about the drugs having such an obvious effect on our systems. The last few of us were like zombies, hardly moving from our beds except to go to the bathroom. I was a bit worried myself, mostly about what would happen if the sleepiness didn't wear off as soon as the drugs were withdrawn. I couldn't afford to be kept in longer for observation, and I needed all my energy to put back into the renovation. After a week with only one person on site, time was bound to be getting tight. After another week, well, I'd be returning to Desperation Central, I knew that. The nurses changed our beds around, wheeling them together to close the gaps up. It made monitoring us easier, and we were past caring. Wires from electrodes on my chest led to a heart rate monitor next to the bed. which was an absolute nightmare. Turning over in my sleep was quite hazardous. I'm a hairy bugger, and nowhere worse than on my chest. The wires would only stretch so far before the machine would yank them back, performing an impromptu waxing on a small circle of body hair, and a nice pattern of bald spots ranging up and down my torso, which would be hard to explain if anyone ever saw me naked. Well, other than the 9 dudes who saw me naked all day, every day. It was too damn hot for pyjamas. And the bloody bed sheets were made out of rubber. At least they wipe clean easily. One day, there were 9 of us. Then 8. People were giving in to fear, which seemed pointless to me, as they'd already been taking the drug for a week. What was it going to do that it hadn't done already? And anyway, we were being closely monitored 24/7. Our blood work was being checked every couple of hours. If there was something going to go wrong, the administrators would know about it. They weren't about to take the risk with the health of a whole room full of young men, I hoped. And then there was a big commotion a few beds down. An alarm had gone off on one of the monitors. Itself, not a surprising thing, as mine was going off all the time. I must have been fitter than I thought, as every time I fell asleep, my already low heart rate would dip low enough to blow the alarms. They'd had to recalibrate my machine to stop the bloody thing waking me up every 10 minutes. But this was different. Nurses were rushing back and forth around the bed, stage whispering commands at each other in tense voices. That afternoon they stopped our drugs. We were kept in for another couple of nights until tests confirmed that the last of the medicine had left our bodies, and then we were sent home early with half our pay. The buggers. But I had to admit, I was grateful to be getting out of there. Not because of the food, or not only because of the food, and not because of the needles. Because while I was asleep, the guy in bed number 6 had had a bit of a turn. His heart had stopped. Thankfully, the nurses had been on hand straight away and had managed to resuscitate him, but the rest of the trial had been cancelled because, as I'd thought, the hospital bosses took a dim view of doing long-term damage to a whole room full of young blokes, to say nothing of killing them. And I should probably actually point out.
Did you find out what it was?
I actually could, because I have all the notes from all my old medical trials, because they give you like a almost phone book-esque bit of documentation when you actually sign into one of those trials, and they go over it incredibly thoroughly. You've got to sit there in their presence and read like 40 plus pages. It takes forever, and you've got to sign an initial and date the bottom of every one, and if you do it in the wrong format, so I was signing mine TS, and if I signed anything else like AS, they'd have to get me a new thing and start again. And if you put the date wrong, you put the date, say 12th of January, you had to write 1-2 for 12, JAN for January, and then 1-6 for 16. And if you were getting a bit and you just wrote like 12:01, oh, trouble. They'd have to get Tipex out and white out the whole thing. And they were really, really weirdly meticulous about that stuff. But luckily, I guess they were meticulous about every aspect of it. So I generally always felt quite safe in those. And I actually did a lot. I did at least maybe 15 medical trials. And the one, that was the worst one where the guy's heart stopped. I actually, because I didn't want to write like about stacks and stacks of medical trials, I've done them for years, and I did amalgamate some of them a little bit into that book. It's one of the slight liberties I took. So that was, no, actually I didn't, because I'd only done a couple at that point. It was the one. What it was. That wasn't my first one. I did one beforehand to get used to the phobia of needles, which is only about 4 days inside. So there, I literally went in absolutely terrified of needles. Literally, I would go white and shake and sweat, and then come close to passing out. I was terrified of blood and the sight of blood. And in actual fact, I famously, and Mum's never let me forget it, in college when I was 17. I went to first aid course after college, and it was like over 6 or 7 weeks or something. And in bleeding part 1, I passed out, literally actually fainted in my class. And there was no blood. This is just talking about blood. And then the next week in bleeding part 2, I fainted again. So I was a bit of a wuss when it came to all that sort of shit, despite Mum being a nurse. It was after I decided I should be a hardcore traveller. I'm, picturing myself Indiana Jones here. I just can't be afraid of needles. Come on, man, that's ridiculous. So I did the first medical trial, and it went off without a hitch. And I think I got paid like £800 English for 4 days inside. It was phenomenal. And I went in absolutely terrified of needles. And by the end of that trial, I had counting them up, and I'm pretty sure I had something in the order of 45 separate needles in and out of me in that time. And by the end of it, I could sit and watch, and built up to the point where I could watch them put the needle right in my arm, and I was taking my own cannulas out each day at the end of it. Never let me put one in myself, unfortunately, but not in that trial anyway. But anyway, so that was actually, I did do one before that, and then I did that one. That was pretty freaky. There was all the rest of them, and I think I only mentioned one other medical trial in one of my other books, probably the pain trial, yeah. And so so yes, because I had to. That was how I made the budget for my wedding. Didn't have any money, so in order to get married, I did a medical trial, and got the entire wedding budget from it. But that was an interesting one because they were testing pain medication, and they were causing us pain to see if it was working or not. But I think I amalgamated in that one. I added a couple of bits from other trials that were amusing, and there were some bits that I never got to tell. I don't think I ever told the story of the trial where we all just had the rooms all the time. So there were only like 4 toilets and like about 30 guys. And this one was in New Zealand, in Christchurch. And we'd all tag teaming on the loo. And there'd be a queue, and there'd be people hammering on the toilet. Come on, there's like a queue building here. And and the whole ward absolutely stank. It just smelled like decomposing cabbage for the entire time. It was the most disgusting thing. And it was not uncommon to just walk randomly past a group of guys, and they would be discussing their poo in depth, in granular detail, because it was literally all we could think about. And we coined the term ring sting because our arseholes hurt so much from being constantly wiped that don't be eating. If you know anything by now, don't eat whilst watching me do these things. Yes, so that was an interesting medical trial. I've done so many, but I won't bore you with more of those. Instead, I've got one more story, because how long have we been on, love?
25 minutes.
25, okay.
A couple of people said, please don't do any more medical trials.
But I actually went, it's weird, just to tell this little story. It's not funny or anything, sadly. But I had a weird turn, actually, in the pain study, which was the last one I actually did. And so that's going back. We got married in 2011, so I haven't done one since 2011, not for want of trying. So in that study, right at the very beginning of it, we were all getting tested, and one guy in the next bed told me that he'd heard that a load of people in the group prior to us had been sent home because they failed a blood pressure test. And I was like, I never failed a blood pressure test, strong as an ox. And he said, oh yeah, no, he says, really hard test to pass this. They take it when you're lying down, when you're standing up, and there's a difference between them. It's got to be under a certain thing. He says, really hard. He said, half of them were just sent home right then. And I shit myself. Because this was my wedding budget, and I've never failed a medical trial before. And suddenly I started thinking about that. So I mentioned to the doctor, and I said, they did me a blood pressure test then, and I failed the blood pressure test. And they said, oh, don't worry. And I had a meeting with the doctor, and I said, I'm really worried about this. I think I'm going to fail this blood pressure test tomorrow. This guy told me that all these people failed. I can't fail this test, or I can't get married. Like, what's going to happen? And he said, oh, don't worry, you'll be fine. Just don't think about it. Anyway, so the next morning, they were going to administer the drugs, and this is where they qualify you in or out. And never been a problem. They tested the blood pressure of beds 1, 2, 3, and 4. And they sent them all home. They all failed it. I shit a brick. I was in bed 5. And the guy who told me about this was in bed 6. And I had a blood pressure test, failed it. And he had his blood pressure test, and he passed it. Bastard, smug motherfucker. But they'd done retests on the first few, and they'd still sent, I think, 3 out of 4 of them still went home. And they came back to do a retest to me, and I said, look, I'm psyched. I've psyched myself out. Like, I've got no problem with blood pressure, I promise you. But I'm gaming myself here. I'm panicking, and I'm never going to pass this. And they said, well, just be calm, be calm. They gave me another blood pressure test, and I failed it. And they were like, you got to go home. And the doctor I'd talked to the previous evening was just walking past, and I sort of looked at him and said, oh, how are you doing? He goes, oh, I failed the test. What am I going to do? And he looked at the nurse and goes, oh, he's okay. Don't worry, he talked to me about it last night. And they said, are you sure, doctor? You're going to sign off on him? And he said, yeah, he's okay, don't worry, include him. And that was it. And that was literally the only reason I was on that study. And so I shit bricks for the rest of the study, and I failed every blood pressure test for the next 3 days, and I finally started to calm down. Did the test 2 weeks inside, or 20 days inside, longest one I'd ever done. And at the end of it, went home, no problem. And I came back, later on, you do a follow-up visit a couple of weeks later before you get your money. So I came back for the follow-up visit, and I was like, wasn't it silly of me having that blood pressure test thing? What a stupid mental block to have. And then it suddenly occurred to me that I still had to pass one more blood pressure test or they wouldn't give me my money. And so I failed that one. And I failed it again. And I was there for about 5 hours and I couldn't pass a fucking blood pressure test and they wouldn't let me go until I did. Finally, they like bent the rules and I passed it with like just a little bit over. And I've never been able to pass a blood pressure test ever since. And so I've now tried 3 more medical trials and it comes to blood pressure test and I failed it.
Well, he's psyched out now.
Psyched out. It's really weird. I've never figured it out.
One more story.
Sorry?
One more story.
One more story? Okay, one more story. Anyway, shut up all that bullshit. Because this one's actually funny, I promise. I promise. And so, Mum, goodbye. Time for you to go. This is the renovation one.
Oh, no.
So, we renovated this house in the South Wales Valleys in Treorchy, and we did not have a working toilet for a long time, because after we demolished it, we then had to replace all the drains, and it took weeks to find the drains, longer to replace them, and to cut an incredibly long story short, we eventually got a toilet fitted. And that's where we begin our story. There'll be a few names in here which you won't get, so I might kind of pause just to mention who they are. So our plumber was a guy called James, and you know that Gillian is my sister, Jill, and that might be it for now. So let's carry on, shall we? It's called Waterworks. Having a working flushing toilet fitted in the Treorchy house was possibly the most exciting point of the entire project. A day later, we also had a shower, although none of us dared use it. With the final and now extended deadline only a couple of weeks away, it seemed like it was tempting fate too much. I mean, everyone deserves a toilet, but a shower? Were we worthy of such luxury? Would we be punished for our vanity by having it explode in our faces the first time we turned it on? If our previous luck with plumbing was anything to go by, the answer was a definite yes. That shower was almost certainly a time bomb, and none of us dared test the theory. There simply wasn't time to repair flood damage and install another one, not while there were skirting boards still going on, doors to be oiled, ceilings needed painting, carpets to get laid. It was a measure of how insanely busy we were that I hadn't even thought about getting laid myself. Which is probably for the best, as I spent most of the week looking and smelling like a long-dead member of the Addams family. We needed only 2 things to make the plumbing complete. First, there were myriad holes chopped out of the floor in the most unlikely of locations, each one lying in wait to catch an unsuspecting ankle. They needed repairing, although so much damage had been done already that we'd had to abandon the idea of polishing up the floorboards. Dad was thrilled that he could have the entire house carpeted, and by this stage, Jill and I were just glad we didn't have to hire a floor sander. Carpeting was a job we could contract out, would take less than a day, but it couldn't be done until the missing chunks of floor had been replaced. The second thing we needed our plumber for was a gas certificate. You can't get the final okay from the building inspector without this, making it one of the most valuable pieces of paper in our universe at the moment, except that there wasn't one in our universe at the moment, and we couldn't sell the house without it. Unfortunately, James the plumber had stopped coming to work. The longer he stayed away, the more we worried. He'd also stopped answering calls for no discernible reason. Yes, I might have been a bit more forceful than usual when complaining about the hatchet job he'd done to the floor, but we were holding on to the last chunk of his cash until after he'd finished. Surely it was worth it to him, a couple more days with the hammer and nails to finally get his full payment. Except that at the back of my mind was always the worry that our plumbing might be less important to him than his real job. As time went on, it was becoming increasingly obvious that James's main source of income was selling drugs. Now, I always knew James was selling drugs, to be fair, mostly because every hour, on the half hour or so, throughout his rather short working day, he would stop, roll a spliff, smoke it, and then ask me if I wanted to buy any. But the final confirmation came when Dad and I went round to his house to confront him about the work he still had to do and demand that he return to finish it, because we could only find his girlfriend. Because James was in prison for selling drugs.
Oh my god.
It didn't look good. The first time we'd lost a plumber, we'd had an almost impossible task finding someone else to take over. Or rather, Mum had. Now it was back to her again, and the Yellow Pages to find our saviour. Ideally, one who'd work all weekend and all night for free. As I may have mentioned, it did not look good. And unsurprisingly, it never happened. Our new plumber was shockingly expensive and we were beyond broke, but we had absolutely no choice. He was efficient though. He wasted no time in ripping up all the floorboards we'd been carefully nailing back down, starting with the one by the lounge door that was making a squeaking noise. He muttered to himself, as most tradesmen do, but we tried not to read anything into it. He seemed to know what he was doing. He delivered his final report to the whole family. We took a break from group sanding our new skirting boards and stood in a defensive semicircle to protect ourselves from the news that we felt was coming. "It's the wrong size," he said. "What is?" Mum asked. "The pipe." "Oh, which bit?" "All of it." It turned out that James had run some quite tidy lines amongst his other less tidy lines. His approach to carpentry was about as poor as could be expected, as he'd sawed almost clear through a couple of the joists supporting the first floor. But the real killer, the bit that was going to sting us the most, was this. He'd used the wrong gauge of copper pipe, presumably because it was cheaper, on the entire house. Everything was at least one size too small, including the pipes carrying the gas, and those had dimensions that were regulated by law. Every bit of James' pipework was going to have to be redone. It would be as though he was never here, which was pretty much how it had felt most of the time he had been here. That was pretty much the worst thing he did to us. Oh, except he never could have given us that gas certificate, because he wasn't qualified. When he joked with us about how simplistic and pointless the Corgi gas fitters exam was, I never for once thought that was because he hadn't taken it. The bastard. Dad swore that evening as he hammered the floorboards back into place for the second, and in some cases the third time. He swore and hammered, cursing James, our builder Lenny, the Welsh, our luck. Then there came a time when his swearing grew louder and more frantic. By now, we were all so well drilled in the face of an emergency, we were all there before he'd thought to call us by name. Frustration, tiredness, and a desire to outright murder some bastard Welsh plumber had combined in my dad to give him tunnel vision. He'd pounded nails hard into the floor, and not always with 100% accuracy. Result? He'd driven a nail clear through one of the undersized copper pipes that fed cold water into the house. When we arrived, he was on his knees in a puddle, both hands under the floorboards with his fists clenched around the leak. Panic was in his eyes as he tried, and failed, to stem the flow. He knew, we all knew, this was mains water coming in from under the doorstep. It was supplied at enough pressure to rise up 3 stories to the new toilet on the top floor, only now it was being supplied at a similar pressure to the kitchen ceiling below. "Tape!" Mum called. "It's too strong," Dad said. "My hands can't hold it." I took over from him, gripping the punctured pipe with all my strength. There was a spray as we swapped over, soaking all the others who were bending over for a closer look. Then my fist was around the problem, the water dribbling slowly from between my knuckles. Dad sat back, rubbing his hands. Already I could feel the pressure building, a spot of pain burning into my palm, my grip weakening. "Call the plumber! I'm not going to be able to hold this for long!" Then Jill came to the rescue. "Here, try this!" She thrust something to me on the end of her finger, and I looked up confused. "Jill, what the fuck is that?" "It's chewing gum. I was just chewing it." "What the... Are you fucking..." Words failed me for a few seconds. Then I tried it. That is how desperate we were in that moment. And it worked. Kind of. The gum stuck into the hole and adhered to the pipe, slowing the flow immediately. It had the makings of a solution, but one piece would never be enough. Jill ran for the packet, then doled it out to Mum and Dad. 4 pieces left. "I'll run to the shop," I said. "Jill, can you..." Jill took over, wrapping her hands around the gum-covered pipe, and I took off for the corner shop like the hounds of hell were after me. I bought all the gum on offer, 26 packets, each with 10 tabs in them, and raced back to the house. And so we sat there, in a circle on the floor, chewing gum as though our lives depended on it. We crammed in as many pieces as we could fit, chewed until the consistency was right, then spat it out, moulded it onto the growing lump around the pipe, and stuffed in another mouthful. It was a little awkward, as I don't normally masticate in front of my parents. Finally, the leak was sealed. A wet, sticky ball encased the pipe, glistening with saliva. Occasionally, a bead of water squeezed out of the mass and dripped kitchenwards. It was a solution as crazy as it was ideal and as precarious. The plumber was called and would be here in the morning. With the water under control, we hadn't dared ask him what the emergency call-out fee was. No running water at all, Dad said. I agreed. Any changes or surges in water pressure could blow the lid right off our solution. Just like before, if you need the loo, use the one in the cafe. Cafe's shut by now. Okay, so we in the back garden. I'll go and buy some bottled water from Asda and we can have a cup of tea and go to bed. And that was that. Jill was cleaning away the chewing gum wrappers when she discovered our next problem. Oh, bloody hell. Look what it says on the packet. We all crowded round to see, written on the back under the ingredients, in tiny letters, warning, excessive consumption can cause a laxative effect. If we weren't in the shit already, we soon would be.
What a time to be without a toilet.
Oh dear.
Oh, mate.
Oh, sorry, very unprofessional of me, laughing at my own crap. Or lack thereof. Oh dear, what it was. we've been peeing in the back garden. Peeing in the back garden for weeks and weeks. And every time we had a poo, we had to go to the cafe. And we'd normally leave it till the last possible minute. And then we'd bolt, because we were very busy. And we'd run through into the cafe, shouting so we went, cup of coffee and a shit. They were very tolerant with us in that cafe. Oh dear. Anyway, right. Ah dear, that's your lot for now. We've probably been on way too long. What time is it?
42 minutes.
42 minutes. Right, there we go.
Brilliant.
Time to call it.
That's the only Renault story you'll do, your poor
I
mum.
promise. Mum, if you're still listening, I'm really sorry. I know it was deeply traumatic. Never again will I put you through that. Till next time there's a deadly virus killing hundreds of people all over the place and I have to do this all over again. No more renovation, I promise. There's tons of stuff still in this book, so I'm going to do another one from this book tomorrow. Tomorrow?
Tomorrow.
It is tomorrow. Next Sunday, I will do a Thailand. We've done 2 so far from this book, so we could do another one, another 2. Just see how we go. See what I find.
Yeah.
So there's the entirety of Thailand, which is half the book, and a few good things happened.
The dog in the box.
Dog's head in a box.
Always
a favorite. But also there is one that I really wanted to. I was telling you about this actually the other week, so I won't waffle on about it too long. But there's the cut chapters, the ones that I cut out of this book because it was too long. When I worked at the summer school, there's a really funny one of those. So I might tag that onto next week. So next week's I'll do a random one and that, and then a week after we'll go on to Thailand, and then we'll call it a day after that. So 2 more weeks. I'm going to make you suffer through. Don't need the whole dog for 2 more weeks.
And next time,
And you have to wait for kamikaze kangaroos.
there won't be a really annoying Peg in the way next time.
Oh, that's my friend Peggy.
No.
She's part of the
See, much
part of the
better.
podcast.
Where's Peggy the podcast?
This is when it slides slowly down,
No,
revealing the
I-
hideous
the walls.
wall covering.
No, it's beautiful.
There's actually nothing behind it, apart from the screen we find by the side of the road. But anyway, thank you very much, guys. Really appreciate you listening and putting up with my waffle and me staring sometimes at you, sometimes at the camera, sometimes at Barbie. I can see up her nose from
She hasn't
here.
got much of a nose left.
Yeah, I'm really glad you don't make them any more anatomically correct. Anyway, that is it from me. I'm going to say good night from Rue.
Yeah, good night, guys.
Oh, there we go.
Stay safe out there in this
I feel really
crazy
short
world.
now all of a sudden. Yes, look after yourselves and each other, as Jerry Springer would say, but he would say it with more gravitas than me. Right, later guys.
Bye.